According to the French hostages who've been released from Lebanon, this is the nightmare that British hostages may be living through today. To move their prisoners secretly from place to place, the kidnappers wrap them like parcels from head to foot. The tape covers everything, even the blindfold. Only a slit is left for breathing. Once the prisoner is trussed up, the guards take him to a truck which has a compartment like a coffin, built specially under the floor. The hostage is forced inside and a metal plate screwed on to seal him in for a journey that may last 10 hours or more. On one such journey, the released French hostage Jean-Paul Kauffman came to the point of total breakdown.
I couldn't breathe anymore. I hit against the metal box and cried out. They had warned me that if I made a noise, they would kill me. They were really furious, and they opened the box saying, "Why are you shouting? We'll have to kill you if you keep on like this." I said, "Okay, kill me. Go ahead. I'll be very happy if you do."
Until very recently, the plight of the British hostages in Beirut has not been widely discussed by the media. The reason almost certainly a belief that nothing should be said or done that might damage their chances of release. But what are those chances? In the light of much speculation over the last few weeks, the government has again insisted that there must be no deals with terrorists. But is it entirely wrong to negotiate with kidnappers? And if it is, are the hostages now in effect prisoners for life? They have already served quite a sentence.
The battle-scarred suburbs of South Beirut are still a stronghold for the kidnappers. We drove in behind an armed escort provided by the Syrian government, which now has a limited military presence in the area. These streets have become a front line in Khomeini's Islamic Revolution, a base for the terrorists who have hijacked planes, driven suicide car bombs, and kidnapped the Western hostages. Today, small groups of Syrian soldiers man checkpoints on the main roads in South Beirut. It's a gesture that has brought some calm to the area, but has not yet drawn the teeth of the Islamic fundamentalists of Hezbollah. And despite the hopes of people in the West, it's brought no rapid end to the sufferings of the hostages. It is possible that the British hostages are being held within a few hundred yards of where I'm standing, chained up in a small room somewhere in the rabbit warren of South Beirut. And standing here, you begin to understand just how difficult the task of getting them out remains. For though there are Syrian soldiers with us here in this street, they are powerless to help anyone in the apartment blocks behind them. In London, the friends of hostage John McCarthy have called on the government to talk to the Iranians and their Lebanese allies. John's girlfriend, Jill Morell, is leading the campaign, and her tireless efforts have made McCarthy into a symbol for the British hostages in the Lebanon. In 1981, McCarthy got a job with Worldwide Television News in London, and his career began to move. The particular sadness of his case is that he was kidnapped on his first foreign assignment for the first news agency he'd worked for. But at the time, the job of spending a month in Beirut as acting bureau chief seemed exactly what he wanted.
He was thrilled because it was his first chance to prove himself as a journalist, fixer, producer in Beirut, and to be bureau manager in a place like that, is a great thing to have achieved in the couple of years that he'd been at WTN, so he was thrilled.
We told John by telex that the best thing for him to do was to get out as soon as possible. And it was suggested initially that he go across the Green Line into Christian East Beirut, and from there through the port of Junieh onto Cyprus, which most of the Western journalists were planning to do. And he received the telex and came back about an hour later and said that the locals had told him it would be safe enough for him to catch a flight the following day. And we left it at that, basically.
That night, McCarthy was one of the last to stay in the Commodore Hotel, now closed and deserted. The following morning, April 17th, he sent news to London right up to the time he had to leave.
I kept saying, well, you know, you'd better get a move on because it's now 12 o'clock your time, your flight leaves in half an hour. He said, don't worry, I just want to give you these details. I just said to him, in a joking way, be careful of the airport road, because I'd been in Beirut the year before for the hijacking of the TWA airliner, and I said it can be a dangerous place. And he said, don't worry, all the cars are waiting. And I said, all right, off you go. And he said, I'll see you at 5:30 in the local office pub.
John McCarthy set out for the airport in an old Chevrolet taxi. It was 12 noon on April the 17th, 1986, and he was late for the plane. In the car with him were a Lebanese cameraman and soundman, and more Lebanese friends followed in a second car behind. In the event, none of them raised a finger to help him. McCarthy's car drove rapidly down the Beirut seafront, once the most elegant part of the city. Then it turned towards the airport. The driver was worried that McCarthy would miss the plane and turned off to take a shortcut. As they turned, another car overtook them and swerved in front. Men with submachine guns dragged McCarthy out of the taxi, forced him onto the floor of their car, and drove off. There is now a Syrian army checkpoint at the spot where John McCarthy was kidnapped, but neither they nor anyone else has any idea who took him. Some believe that he was seized by an amateur gang, who then sold him to the Islamic fanatics in South Beirut, for in this city a live hostage is worth a lot of money. What is now known is that McCarthy survived what happened on that day and fell into the hands of one of the main kidnap groups in the Lebanon. With the help of one of them, Jean-Paul Kauffman, we have reconstructed the conditions in which they lived, conditions which are probably now being endured by 3 British hostages. The hostages are held almost naked, in rooms with the windows sealed, chained up on a filthy mattress. Jean-Paul Kauffman showed us how he and his fellow prisoners were chained together.
Chaque jour. Moi, pendant 2 ans, j'ai été enchaîné de cette façon-là. Mais à ce moment-là, évidemment, il est absolument impératif de fermer, de baisser les bandeaux. Sinon, les gardes étaient très en colère. Il était absolument impératif de fermer, de baisser les bandeaux. Voilà. Voilà, alors les chaînes aux pieds. Pendant 8 mois l'an dernier, nous avons eu pour chaque nuit la chaîne aux pieds, en plus, bien sûr, de cette chaîne aux mains. Alors voilà.
Kauffman believes that people in Britain have still not realized what the hostages are going through.
Je crois que les Britanniques...
I don't believe that the British know what's going on, because if they knew exactly what the daily life of a hostage was like, they would do something about it. It's impossible not to.
La Grande-Bretagne est un pays civilisé.
Great Britain is a civilized country. It has to do something about these intolerable conditions of detention.
A day in the life of a hostage can start with the guards bursting in to check the chains. There is no privacy. There are 3 meals a day brought by guards with silenced submachine guns. The diet is a white mush of rice and beans. In the cell they have a few well-thumbed books and the bottles they have to urinate in. The French effort to free their hostages was based here at the Ministry of the Interior, which normally concerns itself with France's internal affairs. The Conservative Interior Minister, Mr. Charles Pasqua, who has just left office, set up an informal and secret group which effectively took control of the hostage issue away from France's normal diplomats. Because the minister and his right-hand man both came from the island of Corsica, the group quickly became known as the Corsican Mafia. RAAD lives in a chateau in Normandy. On behalf of the French government, he made repeated trips to meet Islamic leaders in the slums of South Beirut. He has his own way of describing the predicament the hostages are in.
C'est un peu comme une valise à trois clés.
It's a bit like a suitcase with 3 keys. First, there's Hezbollah, the pro-Iranian key, the group on the ground in the Lebanon. And you have to go and see these people and find out their demands. The second key is the Iranian key, because Iran can put pressure on to help us free the hostages. And the third key is the neighboring countries, including Syria. Syria can also help us to free the hostages.
What the French soon found was that the Iranian key was by far the most important, as Iran has a major voice in the affairs of the kidnappers. And we have learned that key decisions are sometimes made at meetings inside the Iranian embassy in West Beirut. On April 22nd, the French team flew from Paris to Beirut. This mission failed to free the hostages, who came out 10 days later, but it did provide public evidence of Iranian involvement. A French newsman, Christian Millet, was allowed to accompany the secret mission so that the hostage release would get maximum publicity. When they arrived in Beirut, the French heard that the leaders of the kidnappers were meeting inside the Iranian embassy.
At this meeting, there were the leaders of Hezbollah, the Iranian ambassador in Beirut, and also the Iranian ambassador to Syria, who came specially from Damascus. His presence was particularly interesting because it said that the ambassador in Damascus is the nerve center of the war. That's to say, he's the one who gives Hezbollah money. He's the one who organizes their supply of weapons. He's their central point for communication and arranges their trips abroad, etc.
Later, Millet and the French team had 3 separate meetings with Hezbollah. The meetings were fruitless, and it seems that at this stage the kidnappers only wanted to hand back 2 hostages, keeping the third as a guarantee that the French would stick to the deal. According to Dr. RAAD, who spent days in South Beirut, the deadlock was only resolved by the Iranian speaker, Rafsanjani, who sent a strong message to the kidnappers in Beirut.
I learnt that Rafsanjani was going to give the green light. I went as usual to the southern suburbs and warned those in charge that we were going to get the green light from Rafsanjani. As soon as I got confirmation, I got all the leaders together and we went to the Iranian embassy. What persuaded them was their complete confidence in Iran. Once Iran gave its guarantee, I believe they have complete confidence in it.
In London, the Iranian chargé d'affaires applauds what he describes as a French change of heart.
So what I want to say, there was a change of heart in France towards the Iranian revolution. And that matters, not only for the Iranian people, but for the whole Muslim community. The France government accepted the revolution in Iran as a reality and as a fact, and dealt with that accordingly. And I think that was the key for their success, bringing and releasing the hostages and sorting out the problems with Iran.
You're really saying then that that your government can bring about the release of these hostages if, for example, it gets better treatment from Western governments?
It depends to those who are holding that. We just issue command, we just advise those who may be in one way or other involved in the process of hostage taking.
But seasoned British diplomats like Sir Anthony Parsons, a former ambassador to Iran and to the UN, regard the French deal with suspicion.
Well, I'm very glad from the French point of view they've got their hostages out, obviously. But I personally think it was the wrong thing to do, because I think once you do get enmeshed in this kind of deal, it doesn't just end there. I mean, you may get your immediate hostages out, but you then become known as the kind of country which is prepared to do deals over this kind of thing. The Iranians, after all, much more so than the Arabs or anybody else, actually invented bazaar bargaining. I mean, they are the gold medalists in international world terms. Therefore, it's a great mistake to play the game according to their rules. Just because they lay down rules of this kind, there's no earthly reason why other people should pick them up.
In London, agreement has been reached on rebuilding the Iranian embassy, which was stormed by the SAS, with Britain paying Iran about £1 million. Mr. Basti says he's hopeful.
And I think that once there is goodwill on either side, as it has demonstrated itself in the solving of the embassy problem, where the compensation issue was settled after long discussion, I think that the time will set out itself and will solve the problems.
So you're saying there has to be goodwill before the hostages can be released?
I don't suggest any kind of suggestion that you are trying to get out of my mouth. But it is obvious that one of the fruits of such kind of close dialogue, cooperation, contact could be a relief to the family of the hostages, either in Iran or in Britain.
I don't call that a deal. I mean, it seems to me that Iran needs better relations with Britain. And at the same time, I would guess myself that the Iranians would like to get this hostage business out of the way. If they need better relations with us, well, there are humanitarian things that they can easily do. If that did create a better relationship, and if we went ahead then and, say, opened discussions in the Security Council with the Americans and others and so on, I wouldn't call that doing a deal with terrorism or anything of the kind.
Supporters of John McCarthy want urgent talks on the hostages, but in the official view, their freedom must come almost as a byproduct of normal diplomatic progress. The British refusal to do an open deal on hostages remains as strong as ever, and there are still formidable obstacles in the way of their freedom. Will Hezbollah be willing to release the hostages, which they may now see as their only real guarantee against outside attack? Are Iran's intentions really as positive as they currently appear? I asked Iran's chargé d'affaires, Mr. Basti, when he believes the British hostages will be free.
Well, I don't know. It depends to the will of the God, whenever the situation is ready for that or ripe for that, and it depends.
Do you believe it will be months or years?
I cannot simply suggest any particular date for that, because it may be disappointing for everyone, even for the hostages' families, and I don't want to disappoint anyone.
Tonight, British hostages are still somewhere in the Lebanon.